that you need to make sure that your light is on if you want to be heard. And at the same time, because we have cameras in the room, they wouldn't be able to hear us if, in fact, they were not on. So that's the reason why. I know that our board members are button trained, very much so already, but I need to add that extra. So I'd like to call this meeting to order. And we'll start by, first of all, acknowledging that we do have a quorum of the board of directors and therefore can conduct business. We'll start with the approval of the minutes from the previous meeting. Secretary Goddard.
Those have been circulated. I have not received any comments prior to the meeting. Are there any comments now on the meeting minutes? If not, I'd move approval.
It's been moved and properly seconded that we adopt the minutes from the previous meeting. Is there any further unreadiness? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Next item on the agenda is public comment. Are there any members of the public who wish to come before this board with comments? If so, now is the time. Are there any members of the public who wish to come before this board with comments? If so, now is the time. We recognize Councilperson Sharon Hurt.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
I wanted to come and publicly thank you all so much for your service. What you do and have done is incredibly important. I was the original sponsor of the Community Oversight Board's resolution for the establishment that did not pass on the council floor. And then we had a group to go out and collect over 8,000 votes in order for it to become a referendum, on a referendum. And from that, there were hundreds of thousands of people who voted in favor of having this board. And the establishment of the board was one of the most enriching and rewarding experiences that I had on that chamber floor. And from that time until today, I don't think that there is any value that can be put on what it is that you all have done. And I wanted it to be known publicly how much the city has been lucky and fortunate to have you all willing to give up your time to help serve the community and make sure that the voices of these citizens were heard. Likewise, I want the public to know that the things that we are seeing is a distraction. And I think it all is about voter suppression. But this is the time that we all have to rise up and continue to ensure that the voices are heard, because they are critically important as we move forward. So again, I just want to thank you so much. Don't let the weapons of distraction distract you. We got to use this as a walk on water moment and keep going, not look at the lightning, the storm, the wind, the thunder. None of it is going to stop us from staying on the course and doing what it is that we know that we are to do to make Nashville the best that it can be. So thank you all very much.
Thank you. Are there any other members of the public who wish to come before this board during the public comment section of our agenda? Any other members of the public? Please come forward. Please state your name.
Hello and good afternoon. My name is Timothy Hughes. I'm a resident here in Madison, and I'm also a former member of the Community Oversight Board, and grateful to be in community with all of you here today. First of all, I want to say how grateful I am to have had the opportunity to serve the community of Nashville as a member of the board, and also to be a part of this Madison community. And I'm so excited that this board is meeting and convening here on today. It is a wonderful occasion to be able to support our local libraries, and to have it here at this facility is greatly appreciated. I also want to say how grateful I am for the sacrifice that I know all of you are making as members of the board, and as a former member myself, I know it is not an easy task. It's not an easy challenge to meet. And so I, with great admiration, am appreciative of all of the service that you have rendered as members of the board and of the staff. I also have a profound appreciation for the way that this board came to be, having been connected to several of the organizations in the Community Oversight Now Coalition who helped to bring it to ratification and ultimately to stand it up as a board, and then to serve as a member on the board itself was indeed an honor and a privilege. So I want to say thank you once again for your sacrifice and your service. I think that we're in a very pivotal moment in our city's history. It's taken a long time for us to arrive at the moment where a community oversight board is here to represent the interests of community and to build relationship between local law enforcement and the communities who are being policed. And I think it's critically important that we continue to fight to make sure that every voice is heard in the community and to represent the interests of the various constituencies here in our community. I'm also very concerned with the efforts being made by the state legislature to take over the rules and the responsibilities and the ability of community oversight boards in the state of Tennessee to adjudicate the duly elected responsibilities that they have been given by members of the community and the constituents who voted for their creation. It is disturbing to me that the state of Tennessee, at a moment in the aftermath of a number of different uprisings, at a moment when we are trying to build relationship with community members and with local law enforcement, for them to step in this way and to move to try to essentially overturn the decision and the votes of hundreds of thousands of Tennesseans who have voted in favor of the creation of such boards is an overstep and an overreach, and it's irresponsible, in my opinion. So I just wanted to say how grateful I am for the work of the MNCO, the committed work of the members of the board and the staff who make it do the work that it's doing, and we continue to stand as a community in support of the effort that you're making. Thank you very much.
Are there other members of the public, citizens, who would like to come before this board during the public comment period? Is there anyone else who would like to come before this board to speak? Please have a seat, state your name. Right, please have a seat and speak into the microphone. Pleasure to have you here.
But I have concern issues in reference to my son, Frederick Braxton. And I have documents here to show proof that my son has been over-sentencing by the court and also has not been released yet. And these are the documents that they didn't, if you want to see, you can pass it around. It'd be easier for you to look at it. But he's supposed to have been out a long time ago. If you look at the calculation on these forms, you will see. The counselor was very nice, went into computer system. They changed everything on his file once he started serving time. He's supposed to have been home a long time ago, and I have lost so much sleep due to the corruption of the system that is not doing their correct calculation for the inmates. And it's not fair to the public, and it's not fair at all to the people that holds office in representation to support. I just got off work, I'm sorry. But if you look here, and you hire an attorney, pay him $30,000, and still in there, and you see, quite natural, he can see that this is not right, but it's like you overlook it. You the attorney, you supposed to get deep in it. And if you know your client's supposed to be released, he's supposed to be released. So I would like for you all to look at it, please.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank
If you'll leave it there when you're
Okay.
done, we'll take a look at it, and if there's anything that falls within our authority or area of responsibility, we will respond.
Yes. I was going to write to the sheriff of responsibility also in reference to that attorney, Mr. Daniel Hartwig, that not do his job in reference to my son. and just to overlook it, and it hurt me because I've lost a lot of sleep. You know, every kid is not bad. You know, I know you have a history, but I know people can change at the same time if you give them the opportunity. Not just stigmatize him like, oh, he's nobody, he's somebody. We all are somebody, in or out. But that's all I want to say. Thank you.
We appreciate you. We appreciate that. And again, if there's anything in those documents that falls within our purview, we will respond.
I think it does.
Okay.
fall in your
All right. Can you hand that to our legal advisor, please? Okay. All right. And we'll continue with public comment. If there's anyone else, hearing none, we'll close public comment. It is my understanding that the legislation to abolish community oversight boards is now at the governor's desk, and that it remains yet to be signed. And so at this point, I want to call on Governor Lee to hold that legislation. I want to call on Governor Lee to acknowledge the 135,000 voters of Nashville and Davidson County who by referendum went to the polls and voted to establish a community oversight board. I want to implore Governor Lee to recognize that unlike other community-based oversight entities throughout this state, that this particular community oversight board is the only one called that in particular, and therefore that, Governor Lee, this may be targeted legislation by the part of the 113th Legislative Assembly. I want to call on Governor Lee not to sign this bill that represents the very worst in petty politics, in revenge politics that has absolutely nothing to do with the stellar work that has been done by the staff of NNCO as well as by this board. Governor Lee, I hope that you will recognize that Nashville-Davidson County voters voted for and prescribed what is and should be the model for community oversight, not only here in Tennessee, but around the nation. Governor Lee, I call on you, I ask you, I implore you not to sign this bill. It's a bad bill. It's a bill that ultimately would challenge what is considered to be the constitution of this local government. It's an attack on the charter of the people of Nashville and Davidson County, coming into someone's hometown and unilaterally changing without their individual will, something that the people, the citizens of this jurisdiction, have worked hard for and put in its charter through a majority vote, would be devastating not only to those whom we represent. I don't know where else someone who we just heard from would have a forum to speak what she just spoke. I just don't know where else that would happen, as well as the countless others of citizens that have come before this board. I implore you, Governor Lee, to make sure that voter suppression does not take place here in Nashville and Davidson County or anywhere else in the great state of Tennessee, because that's exactly what the issue is. There's two things in common with the legislation that attempts to eviscerate our Metro Council and what's going on here with the COB. Number one, it was the people who decided we wanted 40 council members by vote. It was the people who decided that we wanted a COB with investigative powers, with the power to compel witnesses, with the power and authority to be able to, in advance, make recommendations for allegations of police misconduct and to conduct policy research. Governor Lee, I ask you to send this bill back and make them get it right. Much like the reform in gun legislation that was passed by this 113th that may need to be called back into session, I ask you, Governor Lee, to take a look at this bill as, again, being something that is not in step with what the people want. And with that, I will just again thank the members of this board, volunteers who have worked tirelessly and have been on top of situations that most of the public's not even aware of, as well as the staff of NCO. And just as importantly, I want to thank the brave men and women of the Nashville Metropolitan Police Department, those who put their lives on the line every day. We want you to know, as you already do know, we take your careers and your lives very seriously, as they are our own. And we have provided through research, and we have provided through policy and through collaboration a bridge that continues to build trust between our law enforcement agency and the people of this great metropolitan area. Those are my comments for today. I'd like to welcome our latest board member who was added at the behest of the mayor and by ratification of the Metro Council, Ms. Mary H. Beard. And we welcome her to this board and expect that she will continue to make contributions to this board as she has to other agencies and other and other organizations throughout our metropolitan area. So we look forward to that. The purpose of one of the main and most significant purposes of the COB is to investigate allegations of police misconduct. And we do that by taking in complaints from the public, launching thorough investigations. That's when and if we see that there's a finding of fact, and then proposing a resolution of that complaint to this board. So our next item on the agenda, as it is on most agendas, is our proposed resolution reports that come back from staff recommending to this board what actions, if any, should be taken in response to citizens' complaint of police misconduct. We have two of those on the agenda today, and Director Fisher. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. I appreciate you. And I'm going to go back to the beginning. Keep me together, because I want to do a reading of the appeal statement as is protocol. Pursuant to the provisions of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, please take notice that decisions of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County Community Oversight Board may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under a common law judicial writ. Any appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by the board. Any persons or other entities considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to ensure that time and procedural requirements are met. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Appreciate that. To our first proposed resolution report, Director Fitcher.
Right. Thank you. We're going to cover PRR, it's MNC complaint CC 2022-012. The allegations of misconduct are against Officer 1, obstruction of rights, deficient performance of duties, adherence to rules, which is documenting the interaction, and against Officer 2, obstruction of rights and deficient performance of duties. The summary of complaint, the allegation is on March 31st, 2022, the complainant filed a complaint with the Metropolitan Nashville Community Oversight stating that on February 16th, 2022, the complainant's fiance called him to tell him that the police had surrounded their home. When the complainant arrived home, 2 employees with the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department Officer 1 and Officer 2 handcuffed the complainant, placed him in the back seat of the police vehicle, and told the complainant that he was being charged with fleeing an officer and reckless driving. The complainant further alleged that Officer 1 told the complainant, "I can't show no prejudice or bias. I can't take you downtown for felony fleeing because we never had the sirens on. We only blowed at you." Officer 1 and Officer 2 then took the complainant out of the vehicle, unhandcuffed him, returned his items, and gave him a citation for reckless driving. The findings of the fact are, on February 16, 2022, about 3:59 p.m., Officer 1 and 2 observed a white van they believed was traveling over the speed limit and driving recklessly. Although Officer 1 didn't recall the speed limit and didn't know how fast the white van was going, he stated he observed it swerving and heard the tires screeching. Officer 1 stated to MNCO investigator that he did not activate his blue lights while following the complainant for the first couple of blocks. After the first couple of blocks, Officer 2 turned on the blue lights while the Officer 1 pursued and used the air horn, but the driver of the white van did not stop. According to the in-car camera footage, Officer 1 reached speeds as high as 56 miles an hour in his effort to catch up with the complainant. The complainant stated that he was not aware that the police tried to pull him over, he did not see the blue lights, and he did not hear the air horn. Officer 1 discontinued the pursuit around 4:01 p.m., but put out a call via dispatch for officers to be on the lookout for the white van. Approximately 10 minutes later, 2 additional officers parked at the residence associated with the tag Officer 1 reported. A white van matching that tag was observed parked at the location, but no one was inside the vehicle. In total, 4 officers and 2 patrol cars arrived at the residence. 1 patrol car was parked in front of the home. The second patrol car was parked in the alley behind the home. The 4 officers spent approximately 24 minutes walking around the home, knocking on the door, and shining flashlights into the parked white van. About 4:24 p.m., the complainant arrived at the residence in a separate vehicle after his fiancée called him. The complainant admitted to driving the white van earlier, but denied seeing Officer 1 try to stop him and stated he had his music too loud to hear the air horn. At around 4:35 p.m., Officer 1 initiated the arrest of the complainant for felony evading and reckless driving. And while the complainant was in custody and handcuffed in the back of the patrol car, Officer 1 attempted to review the in-car camera footage during the interaction with the complainant, but was unable to access the recording. Officer 1 believed his in-car camera was malfunctioning at the time, so he decided to release the complainant with a traffic citation in lieu of arrest. Officer 1 later learned that he had been unable to view it at the same time because the recording was still in progress, and recordings are unable to be viewed while they are in progress. Around 4:53 p.m., Officer 1 told the complainant, "All right, sir, so this is what's happening. I just reviewed my car camera and everything, and my car camera didn't activate on the traffic stop, okay? So what we're going to do is you're going to get a ticket for the driving, the way you were driving, and I'm not going to take you to jail for the evening, for evading, okay? Does that make sense? And I'm doing that because I don't want it to seem like I did something to the camera or anything like that, because that was not my intention, obviously, all right? So I don't know what happened. I'm going to figure out what happened with my car or why the camera didn't activate when I tried to stop you, okay? We're just going to give you a ticket today." At 4:55 p.m., the officer said, "So you're lucky the camera didn't kick on. Honestly, honestly is what it is. And me not wanting to make it seem like I'm going after someone illegitimately when I did try to stop you, okay? So you're going to get a ticket. Let him finish that, and we'll give you your stuff back, and you'll be on your way." A discussion and analysis says, from review of the body-worn camera video and evidence, it appears as though Officer 1 and Officer 2 had reasonable suspicion to initiate the traffic stop of the driver of the white van and probable cause to believe that the complainant was the individual driving. Although Officer 1 initially believed his in-car camera not to have activated, it appeared that it was in fact working, and MNCO, we were able to review that. The manual states, MMPD Manual 18.10.30, Section G11 states that a vehicle stops data MMPD Form 252 shall be completed for all officer-initiated vehicle stops, which are moving traffic violations, equipment violations, and investigative stops based on reasonable suspicion or probable cause of criminal act. During his interview, Officer 1 was asked if a stop data form was completed, and he responded, "I don't recall." On September the 23rd, 2022, the MNCO investigator requested a copy of the stop data form from MMPD records and was advised that there was no data stop. Mediation was not offered in this case, so the conclusion is the allegations of obstruction of rights and deficient performance of duties against both Officer 1 and Officer 2 are not sustained. The allegation of violation of adherence to rules by way of documenting the interaction against officer, which they call a stop form, is sustained. The violation, the recommended action is after a review of Officer 1's disciplinary file, it reveals no disciplinary violations within the relevant time period. Based on the foregoing, the ED recommends a Category F violation and a formal counseling. And that concludes complaint CC 2022-012.
Members of the board. Judge Brown.
I think it's a very complete report, and it shows the value of body cameras. It might be worth at least to mention that perhaps a little more training on how to access the car camera would be helpful. Other than that, I think I would believe that it's a thorough report and shows the value of body camera, and it would have been helpful if they'd had the car camera as well, but I recommend we approve the PRR.
Board members' comments? Hearing none. Judge Brown, I'm sorry, Board Member Brown, would you like to put that in the form of a motion?
Yes.
It's been moved. Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded that we adopt the recommendation of the executive director as it relates to MNCO complaint CC 2022-012. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, say no. Takes us to the next PRR. Director Pitcher.
This PRR is MNCO complaint CC 2022-063. The allegations of misconduct against officers, discourtesy, deficient performance of duties, lack of professionalism, and obstruction of rights. The summary of the complaint allegations: on November 24th, 2022, the complainant filed a complaint with the Metropolitan Nashville Community Oversight stating that on the previous evening, on November 23rd, 2022, the complainant was in his car on 3rd Avenue when an employee of the Metro Nashville Police Department officer, which would be Officer 1, told the complainant to move. The complainant said he obeyed and moved forward, but when he picked up the passenger, the officer pulled up behind the complainant and issued a traffic citation for blocking the road in violation of his rights. The complainant further alleged that officer was very rude and yelled at him in front of the complainant's passenger in the car. The findings of fact is on November 23rd, 2023, the complainant was driving in the vicinity of 3rd Avenue working as a rideshare driver. And while the complainant was waiting to pick up passengers, the officer was driving past the complainant in the opposite lane of traffic and stopped to instruct the complainant to move. When the complainant told the officer that he was picking up passengers, the officer again told the complainant to move. The complainant obeyed officer's instructions, advanced his car forward. The passengers the complainant was waiting for walked to where the complainant's vehicle had stopped and entered the complainant's car. The officer turned around and initiated a stop at the complainant's vehicle. The initial interaction between the complainant and officer is not captured on either body-worn or in-car camera. The in-car camera video from officer appeared to begin immediately after the officer ordered the complainant to move. From the body-worn camera at 11:33 p.m., the complainant's vehicle is observed parked on 3rd Avenue with its hazard lights on. A passenger is observed getting into the complainant's car. This stretch of 3rd Avenue has 2 lanes, one traveling in each direction and separated by a double yellow line. 3 cars, a black sedan followed by a white sedan followed by a red sedan, are seen having to cross the double yellow line into the lane of oncoming traffic to get around the complainant's parked car. No oncoming traffic is observed at this time. The officer parked behind the complainant and activated his blue lights, but not his sirens. An officer got out of his car before the officer reached the complainant's back bumper. Traffic began moving, and the complainant pulled off at a low rate of speed. The officer took out his flashlight and waved it in the complainant's driver's side view mirror, but the complainant continued driving. When the officer returned to his car, he accelerated to catch up with the complainant and activated his sirens, whereupon the complainant was pulled over. They had an initial back and forth conversation about why he pulled off, and, they had this long conversation. But after the complainant gave the officer his license and registration information, the officer spent about 8 minutes back in his patrol car and returned to speak further with the complainant and returned his documentation. There is a long discussion at that point. The complainant was ultimately given a vehicle stop receipt, but no official citation was issued. The complainant's complaint to MMPD was referred to the Central Precinct, and after investigation, they concluded it was unfounded. No OPA investigation was conducted into this matter. According to our discussion around this is, according to the legal resource advisor, the complainant appeared to be pulled over after the officer had probable cause for a violation of TCA 39-17-307, obstruction of a roadway. As it is often the case with traffic violations, which, for instance, speeding, it is not out of the ordinary that more than one individual can be observed committing a traffic infraction, yet only one individual is stopped and warned or cited for it. This unequally applied enforcement is often cited as a source of frustration and unfair treatment by recipients of the warning or citation, but it is not unlawful. The ED notes that it is visible on the officer's in-car camera video that the passengers are exiting onto the roadway and not in designated loading zone or parking lot. During this interaction, the officer does not deny that other people do similar behavior as the complainant, but that after telling the complainant to move twice, the complainant was still observed by the officer to be obstructing the roadway. Excuse me. While some of the complainant's questions could be construed as argumentative, the complainant's demeanor and tone throughout was polite and at an even tone. Similarly, during the officer's interaction with the complainant, the officer's demeanor and tone of voice appeared appropriate. However, there were instances at both the beginning and ending of the interaction when the officer's voice could be perceived as higher. The ED notes that, particularly from the cell phone video provided by the complainant of the interaction, the officer's tone of voice appeared louder when captured from inside the interior of the vehicle. The officer's voice recorded on the body-worn camera while the officer is standing outside competing with the noisy street did not appear as loud. So mediation was not offered in this case. The conclusion is, as to the allegation of obstruction of rights, the executive director finds that it is unfounded. As to allegations of discourtesy, conduct unbecoming, and deficient performance of duties, the executive director finds by preponderance of the evidence reviewed that they are not sustained. So there are no recommended action, and that concludes MNCO complaint CC 2022-063.
Board member discussion. Judge Brown?
Coincidentally, after I read the director's report, there was, I believe it was Channel 4, had an interview with the driver about this issue and being cited and costing him money, and they were having problems with where they park down Lower Broadway. And the report had that the statistics showed that beginning, I think, about midterm of last year, the number of citations issued for parking down that area had increased significantly. And for anybody that's had the misfortune of trying to get through downtown Broadway, blocking traffic down there is a problem, and it would certainly help if there were some designated pickup points and some loading zones. I think the officer offered basically said, there are some parking areas, but overall, it doesn't look like this was a case where there was unfair targeting of this driver, that Metro has been stepping up their enforcement for this, and the report indicated that there had been some efforts to try to find spaces to pick up and drop off passengers, but they're just, right now, there isn't a space. So it appears to me that the director's report is accurate. There's unfortunate, but at some point you've got to have traffic move. So I would, unless there's other comments, I would make a motion that we approve the report as written.
There's a motion. Is there a second? For the purposes of discussion, is there a second?
Second.
Further board member comments? Pastor Turner?
Yes, sir.
Board member Turner? is right.
Yes, sir. I would hope, I spoke at the last meeting I attended, I hope that the policy could change in the future. That, look at the report that the body camera was not turned on from the initial conversation or the initial interaction. And so, I spoke before that there need to be some policy change in that when the police, from the beginning of initiation, before, if you're in the car, whatever, that body camera needs to be turned on, and there needs to be some type of policy within that department to definitely, hopefully they would step that up and make that a policy that any interaction before you speak, before you initiate, that you turn that body camera on, because you might see and you lose a lot from that. So I just want to make that definitely comment and hope that that we can definitely push for that policy to be done.
Thank you. Board members? Further discussion? I'd just like to say that I agree with what Board Member Turner has to say about our continually dealing with the issue of body cams not being activated or activating in a timely manner. We have to continue to put a pin in that and also always make sure that we're addressing that issue. I also like to say, after reading the exhaustive back and forth between the officer and the complainant, that the officer showed quite a bit of restraint, at least from what I could read, quite a bit of restraint, and was very patient with the complainant. I mean, that's the kind of commendable behavior that sets the kinds of standards that we're all working towards, because that could have gone a different way if someone was having a bad day. And when you're policing citizens of a jurisdiction, you can't have bad days. You can have bad days. So I want to acknowledge that and support of that, but also acknowledge the patience that was shown there. Any further discussion? If there's no further discussion, there is a motion that has been seconded on the floor. You ready for the question? There is another board member.
I do.
Board member Haddock.
Yes, so Board Member Turner, we had an extensive conversation about body-worn cameras being activated, and we spent a lot of money for officers to have those body-worn cameras, and so we want to make sure that they're being utilized. And so if that is the case, why didn't that issue come up within the PRR?
Yeah. So two things. On this case, the officer is passing him, and this is not an investigative stop. As soon as the officer did get out and had, interaction, because initially he's just waving him forward, then he turns the body-worn camera on. So it's, about a minute that's not captured?
They're passing each other in traffic, and the impression that I got from viewing it was that he had sort of said, move along, and then the complainant did not. And at that point, the body cam was activated. And so that's why we didn't think it was an appropriate use, because it was sort of like as soon as it became an actual sort of stop, he did activate it in a timely fashion.
Anything further? Hearing none, no further on readiness on the motion. All those in favor say aye. Opposed say no. And we have adopted the executive director's proposed resolution on CC 2022.063. I'm going to move the agenda around just a little bit here, and I will once again, I do want to take a moment out to welcome to the Community Oversight Board our newest confirmed member, Ms. Mary H. Beard. Welcome aboard. Thank you. We look forward to your contribution. Any words of intro, please?
Meeting thank you. I had a meeting on my calendar that I could not change with the notice that I had for my first meeting here. But I'm very delighted and very honored that the mayor appointed me to this board and that the Metro Council agreed with his appointment. I am here to serve the citizens of Nashville. I do have a background in representing the police department. I represented the police department in Memphis, Tennessee for a number of years when I was an attorney there in private practice. But again, thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to serving.
Thank you. And with that, we will move to discussions. We seem to be doing well on time right now. And so we'll move into discussions and our subcommittee chair on our memorandum of understanding between the Community Oversight Board and the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department. Board member Drew Goddard, please give us an update.
All right. Current status, schedule-wise, is I've asked Executive Director Fitcher to give me some dates that work for her and the members of her staff that will attend the next meeting, hopefully the last one. And I've asked Deputy Chief Hagar from the Police Department to do the same. So hopefully we'll have a meeting scheduled. Be our last meeting on this next week is what I'm shooting for. We had a very good meeting last week. Deputy Chief Hagar had a late conflict, and Chris Gilder took the lead for the police department in that meeting. He's been the number 2 in the meetings. We had a very thorough discussion of documents and records and the process and time for getting those to us. The police department sent the officer whose name escapes me, Daniel, or you guys may remember this, the officer that is over the records division and the Deputy Blair, who's the one responsible for the records and redactions and getting videos and audios to us, and also Mr. Singleton, who is head of the IT group that has a lot to do with the digital records as well. To jump to the end, they agree that investigative records we get right away. The disagreement was over everything else we asked for, and they had been treating them as just a public records request, go in the queue, first come, first served, and they're 4 months behind, and they've been 4 months behind for at least 4 months. That's a lot of 4 months, but that's where they are. We said for anything that is related to our charter authority, information we are requesting that relates to us performing our charter authority, including audits, all that sort of stuff, that needs to come ahead of, not necessarily all public records in 4 months, but be treated differently. The in-between is how they deal with subpoenas and other court-required other things that are faster requirements than how they are doing public records, and they agreed that we would go in that middle group. If it's a small request, it'll be processed on the same time frame as subpoenas, basically. If it's a very large request, there will be a rolling production, which means you get some and they give them to us as we go. And we also talked, and Gavin was very supportive of this, Crowell Williamson, that's head of our research group, that if we send over requests that is what we think we want, we're not going to do it otherwise. That's what it would be. And from the department side, that is a very large and time-intensive process. That the documents process from that would be for those two to talk. The requester or head of our requesting group, and probably Singleton to start with, to talk and find out 2 things. 1, what's the best way to get all those documents? And 2, if we over-asked, if we didn't realize how many records we're asking for and really don't need that many, be able to pare back some there. And it would be an on the phone or face-to-face rather than starting emails flying back and forth. So I view that as significant progress. Hope you do as well, and I'll have another report next meeting.
Excellent. Thank you again, Director Goddard, for your hard work and commitment to this process of renewal of an existing memorandum of understanding between this board and the police department. And your perseverance in the face of it being somewhat of an adversarial relationship, but when it comes to what's going on across the table, but all parties seem to be moving forward together.
We're moving, I think we definitely are moving forward together. We are close to the end, and in my opinion, the working relationship trying to get to that has improved as these meetings go on.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your effort. That takes us to the next item on the agenda, the legislative update. I of course, in my opening comments, I probably have expressed myself as much as I care to today on that issue. But I will turn to the executive director and other board members who I'm sure all understand the situation that we're in as far as what has been passed by the 113th and where we all are right now in terms of a little bit of ambivalence about where we go from here. So if there's any board member who wishes to engage in any discussion regarding the legislation that is pending the governor's signature at this time, the floor is open. Board Member McCree.
Thank you, Chair. I don't necessarily have any comments as much as I would like for either the Executive Director or Attorney Yoon to give a really basic explanation on what this means for the board and what this looks like moving forward for community members being involved in the process. I think that's really important to make plain and clear at this point, as people are really concerned about what their engagement and what this board looks like moving forward.
I'm going to sound like a lawyer, unfortunately, and I apologize in advance. I think the debate is still open. I'm not sure for everybody it is, but for me, the debate is still open on what this bill exactly does. If you ask some people, it abolishes the Community Oversight Board, and it is up to the mayor's office and council to perhaps create a new PARC, in which case the mayor can appoint 7 board members. I would encourage him to look at the present board makeup and maybe look at the original charter that the people of Nashville have voted for and try to honor as much as possible what they created. And in so much as the General Assembly has stepped on Nashville's turf, so to speak, and tried to limit, I think, some of what the people of Nashville expressly stated they wanted and has been working for the past 5 years. You know, the enactment and implementation of this bill is open. And I think the mayor's office has a responsibility to try to protect as much of Nashville as it possibly can, and the council as well, since they would be implementing what it is the transition would look like. If you ask other people, I think, you know, one interpretation of this bill could be, and I don't want to get too far into it, but that this bill doesn't abolish the Community Oversight Board. What it does is it trims it. If you remember, when the bill passed in 2019, the charter referendum was created, the General Assembly did a preemption bill, and they tried to curtail some of the things that was in the language of our charter. It didn't abolish the charter. It just, when in conflict with the charter, the state superseded that. The state preempted and became the sort of first and only sort of text. To the parts that aren't affected by the new bill, you could argue that the charter still exists. So I can't tell you exactly what this is going to look like in the next few months, but obviously there's going to be some discussions about it, and there's people maybe not as wise as I am, but certainly really high up there. But happy to talk to y'all further about this, you know, when and if we have that time.
Board Member McCree, follow up.
So what I'm hearing is that there is still space for community to shape how this looks for us moving forward, and how civilians have the ability to engage in oversight over our police department?
Absolutely. Even before this charter amendment was created, the people have always been in control. And sometimes it's just about a matter of the people in power respecting and listening to and amplifying what the people want. So thank you to the people for what you've done for the past 5 years, but before that, for resisting and for continuing to be here and to be present. And I would definitely be at the ready, because I think that once this interpretation, and if there is more than one interpretation and people start butting heads about it, you know, I certainly want to hear from the people, and I think the people in power should want to hear from you as well. And it's your voice that I think would matter the most.
Thank you.
Questions? Board Member Turner. Board Member Turner yields. Board Member, I'm sorry, Jeanette Newman? No, please go ahead.
So I wanted to definitely kind of piggyback and the sentiments of your comments, Chair, of just the hard work, past and present, of board members and the staff. Definitely commend our executive director here, Jill Fritchard, who on occasions, I know we have our work schedules, that she was was in the plaza at the state, at the meetings, and speaking to keep this, to fight to keep our Community Oversight Board here. So I wanted just to definitely highlight that as well. We know this is on the desk of the governor, and of course the sentiments again that he will send it back. He won't sign it. It's kind of a slap in the face again to the community who voted. And I hope if the governor signs, we hope he does not and sends it back. And I know we have those discussions that Attorney Yoon has spoken about. That I hope we look at the people that they do have the power and that they will continue to fight, and that they will, in this time as we even look for another mayor and how our council will look, that your vote has power and those hard questions. When the governor, if he signs it, and we will have some form of a new COB that the city, the mayor will respect what we have here. And then whoever gets elected, if we go on down, that the people will again ask those questions. What are you going to do about the COB? Are you going to respect the people's vote, the 135,000+ voters? And I urge the community to do that, to ask those questions, be present at every forum, and ask that question, and keep this board in mind. And so I wanted to definitely say that we still have power with the people, and that we will continue to fight, of course, as a board, and commend everyone for of what has happened, what is doing, and what we are continuing to do. And I hope everybody is this your first time looking at this. I know I'm kind of I guess now the second youngest on the board, but I hope you see, even from just this meeting, the power of what this board does. Just imagine if we did not have this. And when you look at the reports, even the reports, they're not, even though they were not perfect in their customer service, but I believe, knowing that there is a community oversight board that will and review it, and that the citizens can file a complaint, that they're second guessing their behavior, they're second guessing what they do, the body cameras that are on there. So that's just the power. We're working towards making our police better in our city and in our state. And but I hope just from what you just witnessed, this is your first time, you see the power of this and see how it is needed for this day, this time, and what we have accomplished in just the short years that we have. And so again, I urge the public to continue to fight, and whatever happens, that ask those hard questions, and your vote will matter in the future, as it does now. So I end with that.
I saw Board Member Witz.
Yeah, I was going to pass, but I think a question that I get often from residents who know that I'm on the board and they know what's happening is constantly asking me, like, is there a concrete ask that we have of them? So I'm not sure if there's, I think I've asked you, Attorney Yoon, this question before, but at this particular time, is there a specific thing that we want out of the community?
I can't speak for everybody. I can speak for myself, but I would say be ready, because there is going to be a specific ask. I think at this time, literally, the General Assembly's made their choice. There could have been advocacy there at that level. One thing I'm still upset about is there was a head of a law enforcement agency in Tennessee who made statements to the committee chair, who then repeated those statements, didn't come in, allow himself to be questioned in person, which I think could have been helpful. And those statements, you can't guess at how much that was relied upon by the rest of the committee to make their decision. But those statements were false. I don't know any other way to put it. When I think about things that are true, I look at corroborating evidence. This is my experience as a defense attorney. You say this happened. Well, what evidence do you have? Who was there? What reports were made about it? What supervisors did you go to discuss that complaint with? I mean, the allegations were serious. Contamination of crime scenes, investigations being tampered with. If that happened, I would expect to have seen some corroborating evidence. I would have expected there to be reports filed. I would have expected there to be arrests to have been made. I would have expected supervisors of the people responsible for that contamination and the interference to be arrested or talked to. And none of that happened. To date, we have reached out to this department head. We have gotten zero response, but we have confirmed through a reporter that it did happen, that those statements were made to this committee chair. And I think as a governor, if I'm making law, I'm looking at the process that the General Assembly took to get there. But that being said, the governor has a decision to make. There's a point at which the community can make overtures, I'm guessing, to the governor's office to make those decisions or not. But past that, I know that the mayor's office has decisions to make. I know that council has decisions to make. So anybody who has a mayor, anybody who has a council member, find out who that is. And like I said, there's no specific ask at this time, but I know there's one coming.
Now, one of the interesting discussions that I've had with members of Metro Legal as we look down the line at what could be, of course, right now I'm asking anyone within the sound of my voice to call the governor's office now, to email the governor now, and ask the governor not to take away the voted right of the people and to not sign that bill. Okay, that's one thing right now that anyone within the sound of my voice can do. The number, you can Google it. You can get it, okay? Send it to them. But beyond that, in certain discussions I've had with certain members of Metro Council, if this were to become law, it would not be prohibitive from other outside entities from filing an action. For example, if the NAACP's Legal Defense Fund wanted to look at it as a form of voter suppression, they could file. If the ACLU wanted to look at it as a form of disenfranchisement, they could do that. If an individual wanted to bring a litigation, they could do that. And if individuals or agencies felt as though it rose to the level of something federal, then the Department of Justice and the Attorney General could be involved. But here we are on the precipice of, as someone said earlier, a historic moment. And I trust that Governor Lee, that Bill Lee will be on the right side of history as he takes this opportunity to actually contemplate just how bad of a bill this is. Okay? Anyone else? All right. I saw Board Member Haddock and then Board Member Goddard.
You know, it's very disheartening to live in a time where all across the country, not just in Nashville, Tennessee, but all across the country, we are seeing instances of police misconduct and police brutality. But to have in the state of Tennessee, Tyree Nichols lose his life, and then the state legislature introduces a bill to abolish the Community Oversight Board. That's very disheartening. And it tells us where we really are as a state, but as a legislature. And so with that being said, it also brings to mind all of the hard work that was put into establishing the Community Oversight Board and the people being determined that we would have one because of Nashville's instances of Daniel Hambrick and Jacquees Clemens and people advocating and fighting for community members who may have thought initially that they didn't have a voice, but found out really quickly, and with the establishment of this COB, that they did. And so, Chair, you said it best, where the woman that came in and found her place at this table in public comment, because where else would she be able to go? except the Community Oversight Board, the Metro Nashville Community Oversight. This is the place. There is a necessity for the COB. There is a necessity for us to hear complaints. There's a necessity for this body to be convened once a month and hear these complaints. But it's also a place where we uphold the good work that the MNP, Metro Nashville Police Department is doing. Because we provide an objective view when people introduce their complaints. But if we are no more, what will happen to the voices? If we are no more, what will happen to the 135,000 people who exercise their vote? We are at a place where we are moving past voter suppression, and this bill is trying to push us back. But what we're saying is, Attorney Yoon and board members, is that we're not going to go back. The Nashville community, the state of Tennessee, we have to say that we're not going back. We're going to move forward. We're going to build on the good work that the Community Oversight Board has already done. And so not only am I echoing the comments of Chairman Milner, and the other board members, we do ask Governor Lee not to sign the bill, but we're also asking the people to continue to make your voices heard. Continue to stand up, continue to fight, continue to make sure that if there is a complaint, if you need to tell somebody about what's happening to you or in your community, that you know that there is a place where you can go. And so we will be here as long as we will be here. So just know that the Community Oversight Board will fight to be here on behalf of the people.
Thank you. Board Member Goddard.
Thank you. I as well deplore this legislation. I will call Governor Lee. I am not optimistic on that. And because of that, I think there's some things we need to do going forward. A couple of things. I have some thoughts on legislation, how it could be drafted by council that would at least give us the best argument. We still retain powers. I'm more optimistic with respect to having information, doing reports, making policy recommendations, being able to continue that versus maintaining our investigations and PRRs the way we've been doing. That's I'll do as lawyers on that, other lawyers. I'm not as optimistic on our ability to maintain, absent a court injunction or something, ability to maintain investigations the way we've been doing them. And because of that, I think it is extremely important, and we may need a resolution, extremely important that we try to get at least 3 PRRs a month between now and September 29, when this legislation takes effect with respect to those activities. That would be 15. We've got 100 outstanding right now. And part of that would be to implore the director to look, and her staff, to look carefully at what is there, recognize we can have some involvement with those where the incident occurred after January 1, factor that into which ones we try to do with this next 15. And of those others, focus on those that are allegations of significant police misconduct and or offer the opportunity for a resolution that could provide advice and direction to the department beyond just the facts of that specific case. We've got 100. I can't tell you where to draw that line. You know far more than I about what case are best, but put some significant thought into that. What I really don't want to see is another 2 PRR meeting. We just have to focus on that for these next 5 months, in my opinion. Thank you.
Comments by other board members on the issue. Let me defer to Board Member Holloway and then come back to Board Member Brown. Did I see your paddle up, Board Member McCree? Okay. Board Member Holloway?
Yes, if Governor Lee want to start on his crown, he won't sign that bill. He doesn't have anything to lose. He's not running. This is his last term in office. And this is something he will always be remembered of. A great thing if he don't sign this bill. But if he does, there will always be a cloud over his life. Thank you.
Board Member Brown.
Well, I guess I'm the last to speak, and I concur with the other remarks. I think technically, Mr. Goddard can correct me, but if he fails to sign it, it goes into effect. Put a hold on it, he's got to veto it.
I was afraid to ask real like a lawyer. Yes, the request should be that he veto the bill.
Yes.
If nothing happens, it becomes law.
Right,
That's
if he
correct.
doesn't sign it, it becomes law.
It's the opposite of the
He needs
federal.
to veto it. And so, if appropriate, I would consider making a motion that the board formally request the governor to veto the bill for the reasons that have been well stated. I think Member Goddard is correct, and our legal counsel, Mr. Yoon, is correct that we need to, if it becomes law, we need to see what we can do to do as much as we can before our powers are significantly clipped. And but still, the board, whatever its membership at that point could move forward with recommendations. I mean, the board's made tremendous strides, and with all due respect to the police department, we've moved from a chief that was pretty hostile and resisted most anything the board suggested to a chief that is, while he doesn't always agree with us, as we don't always agree with him, is nevertheless worked very hard to establish a relationship. Has been, as Mr. Goddard pointed out on our MOUs, is trying to work that out. Commander Laura has been here at almost every meeting, if not all of them, and been an excellent liaison back. And so we've really developed an excellent relationship, I think, with the police department, and our PRRs have I think, been on target, and many cases they haven't been adopted simply because by law, because the responsibility section has ruled the chief couldn't adopt our recommendation even if he wanted to, and that was something our MOU was going to help correct. So I think we would have had ability going forward, and so as I say, I think board should consider a recommendation requesting the governor to veto it, and individuals, members of the public should certainly be heard to ask the governor to veto this bill, and maybe if he would, maybe it wouldn't be overridden. Of course, the problem is it only takes a majority of the legislature to override the veto, but nevertheless, sometimes it gives the legislature a chance to be heard and maybe put to rest some of these allegations that there were contamination. I'm certainly not aware of anything, certainly that this board has done of that nature. And I agree with our legal director that, for somebody just to make a barefaced allegation without facts or without context of when and where and how it occurred is just not responsible. But so those are my comments. But I think the board should adopt a resolution requesting the governor to veto it for reasons stated by all of the members here.
Is there a second? It has been moved and properly seconded that the Citizens Oversight Board make a recommendation to the governor to veto the pending legislation to abolish this Community Oversight Board. Is there any discussion, any further discussion on the motion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, say no. Motion carries. Thank you, Judge Brown. Appreciate that. And we again implore all of those within the sound of my voice, if you haven't already, to contact the governor's office via email, by phone, Google them, whatever you need to do, and ask specifically that he veto this bill. It's a bad bill. Thank you very much. Next item, I'm going to move to. Okay. All right. I want to move up the executive director's report. I'm sorry. Who do we have?
I just wanted to briefly address what Member Goddard said about the outstanding number of PRRs, which is that we actually took stock of that this morning. We currently have 60 that are outstanding, not 100, so I just wanted people to know that. But
I just counted the report we got earlier in the week, so
yes,
there may have been some that had different designation. I'm sorry.
And just to address that, we are working right now to prioritize, sort of getting which one's done as quickly as we can. So I want you to know that is underway right now.
I'm usually much better at math. I apologize.
All right, if we could now move to the executive director's report, Director Fitchard.
All right, thank you. I'm going to be brief with this. There's not a whole lot of information since I spent the majority of the month talking to community members, working with board members, and attending community things with board members as well to talk about this legislation and the effect that it would have on this board as well as the Nashville community. And as everyone has stated here so eloquently, to put the issues at hand on what would happen to the opportunity for community members to voice their complaints to us and have a voice in this process, one that we know that they're currently, when they use internal affairs or the Office of Professional Accountability, do not have the opportunity to have a public forum of what they have experienced, whether it be police brutality, violence, a negative interaction, or whatever. And as we have all said and we have seen throughout the time that we've been here, that has been very, I think personally, and from what I've heard from people, that has been, has allowed them to have some closure to some of the incidents that they have experienced. And so I echo everything that everyone said in regards to how we're doing this work. As I have stated to you on many occasions and to the public, that this is a best practice model. This is a hybrid model. We do investigations as well as we do investigations, we do policy work, and we also have an outreach arm as well. And so, and we can also look into any other instances of issues within the criminal justice system here in Davidson County. Most review committees have that one arm of just reviewing complaints and giving it back to the police department. They have been proven to be less effective no matter what legislators are saying across the state. And the other agencies that I've spoken to across the state also want to have, more opportunity to investigate complaints as well. So I'll move on from that. I will say that we had our executive committee meeting. It met on Tuesday, April the 18th. Our next monthly board meeting will be held Monday, May 22nd at the Smith Springs Community Center in Antioch. That's going to be from 5 to 7. We welcomed Attorney Mary Beard. Thank you for being here and to serve. And she is appointed for a 3-year term as of now, which ends January 31st, 2026. We know we are still in the middle of a fiscal year budget, 24 fiscal year budget. All of that information was submitted to the mayor's office. If you want to go and look at the budget book that they have available, it's at nashville.gov/Citizens Guide Budget. And it should have every department on there. I don't know if it's going to be updated, but it was on there with most things on there. There is a force review board happening. We had one that was canceled for April. It's been rescheduled for June 8th, 2023. Our department head meeting has been postponed for the mayor's State of Metro address, which is scheduled for this Thursday, April the 27th at James Lawson High School, which is in Bellevue, and that event will begin at 10 a.m. And for the month of April, we received 9 complaints since our last board meeting. And in addition, we had a total of 35 non-complaint calls for service. And also MMPD issued 7 dispositions related to officer misconduct since our last board meeting. Investigators submitted 2 requests for police records. They have been reporting that they're experiencing longer delays in receiving the body-worn camera video footage from MMPD. Solutions for the delays were discussed during our MOU committee meeting, and that may have a direct impact, hopefully, with some of the solutions that will help resolve the issue. And it may be codified within our MOU agreement as well. And we just have been very busy with trying to get the word out about the COB to people who, and talking to complainants and people who have outstanding complaints, but also our community engagement person as well as our social worker. They're having events coming up to make certain that as we're moving forward that they're still sharing the COBs, all of the things that we offer to the public. There's, whether it be investigation complaints, whether it be, connecting with wraparound services for people who are experiencing trauma or the effects of, trauma. So we're making certain that that is done. We had a staff retreat this Friday, and we spent the day training in diversity, equity, and inclusion and trauma-informed care and awareness. And so we actually are continuing to do training. We have training scheduled for this month through NACO. We have some community outreach events coming up this month. And of course, our research team is still working towards completing their research PARs, which are policy advisory reports. We have one sexual misconduct policy advisory report that's still outstanding that they're working on, the auditing of MMPD's body-worn camera footage, as well as a use of force policy advisory report that you'll hear about shortly. I asked Mr. Crowell Williamson to talk to someone at the Public Health Department in regards to the PIC program, which is the Partners in Care. We haven't had an update on that, or the pilot program, the REACH program. And so he's hoping maybe we get a scheduling in May for them to come and talk to us, or maybe, if not May, June, to get someone, the EpiPimp? The Epi. Okay, will come and talk to us about the PICT program, how that's going, as well as the REACH program. And so basically that's my update. The only other thing is I have tried to reach out to the mayor's office and the general services assistant director for an update to, in regards to our office moving. I haven't had an update since the month of March in that regard. And so that is my executive summary report. I'll take any questions.
Questions for the executive director on the report? Any questions? Yes, board member Turner.
I see that you spoke, you're beginning the interviews for the sexual misconduct policy advisory report. How far, what's the time frame on that? Can it be, and I'm just looking, again, being optimistic, but at the same time, if this bad bill is signed and not vetoed, how much will it be completed by September, if possible?
I think so. Based on, the team has started the interviews already. Mm-hmm. So I think that they might be able to get that completed.
That's my question. That's all. Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, hearing none. Thank you very much. Mm-hmm. Appreciate that. Let's move on to our next item, which, if I may, ask Mr. Crowell Williamson if he's prepared for the use of force and or the clearance rate update. Which one comes first? All right, let's go with the use of force report. He's flexible. I love that. This has come before us, and for the first time, this is coming before us. I know that we've looked at a lot of other policy initiatives here, and so if we could just give ear, and you have the floor, CW.
Yes, thank you. And it's on a different PowerPoint, so you're going to have to pull that one up separately. But just briefly to address Board Member Turner's comments, we have basically 3 outstanding policy advisory reports. I think that the body cam audit is the one that is the least realistic to get completed just due to the flow of videos that we've gotten. It was a large request and it's taken some time to get that. We're still we still have quite a few videos outstanding. So in my mind, presuming this policy advisory request gets passed, we would prioritize this, the sexual misconduct report, and any kind of other outstanding reports that we have. So those would be the priorities, I think, in the months ahead. And I think it is reasonable to get these on the agenda by September, both of them. And so I'm going to present to you today 2 items, one of which is really an update, the other of which is a policy advisory proposal. We're starting with the use of force report, which is a policy advisory proposal. Next slide. So just a brief bit of background on why we were doing this. I'm sorry that you're all going to have to turn around if you want to see the PowerPoint. I can also talk, and you can reference the actual report that we sent last week. It has all this information in there. Most of the scrutiny around police, and there has been a lot over the last couple of decades, is centered around the use of force. But use of force incidents are pretty rare when it comes to policing. Less than 2% of police-civilian contacts involve the threat or the use of force, and about 4% of arrests involve more force than necessary. Those are pretty small numbers in terms of percentages, but it does mask sort of larger numbers in terms of raw numbers. If you look at conservative estimates, there's greater than or approximately 600,000 uses of force per year in the United States. And of course, the COB itself was created in response to several instances of excessive use of force in the fatal shootings of Jacques Clemens and Daniel Hambrick. Despite the existence of the board, in 2021, MMPD officers shot 10 people, which is the most they'd shot since they began tracking it in 2005. And we think it's important to have a use of force report completed by an independent entity because use of force reports, when they do exist, are generally produced by police departments, and oftentimes they're very descriptive statistics. And what that means is it's just presenting numbers. It's not really analyzing them and getting to the why. It presents kind of the what and maybe the how, but we want to do kind of a higher level analysis that unpacks and looks at these larger factors. MMPD does have their use of force statistics on a dashboard on their website, but like we saw kind of with the response times, there are some discrepancies between the data that we receive on a weekly basis and the numbers that are presented online. So we want to flesh that out and flesh a number of different ideas out in this report. We'd like to do this annually. Again, being optimistic here that we would be able to get this one out before September and keep doing them as long as we're allowed to keep doing them. Next slide. And just a brief foray into the potential research topics that we might look at. We know from past research that police in general do not use force equally. No matter what sort of protected class you look at, there are disparities across race, sexual orientation, gender, class, the list goes on. And many police departments, including MMPD, approach that problem and many other problems in policing with racial and gender diversity among their police force. That idea is under a bit of empirical scrutiny right now. Research has shown, for instance, that black teenagers have more force used on them during police stops than do white teenagers, and in fact it is particularly pronounced for firearm usage. And so we really want to dig into the effects that racial representation on police force, gender representation on police force has on uses of force, because there are some really interesting things that you've seen in other departments, and we want to see if they're happening here in Nashville. We also want to look at the relationship between subject resistance and use of force. Generally, that's been a very strong predictor. As one resists more, police officers tend to respond with more force. But there's a new idea, maybe it's not that new now, of relative use of force and measuring. So if an officer uses a lot of force, but there's not a lot of resistance, some departments, smartly I think, are using that as a measurement tool for at-risk officers and kind of flagging instances in which the relative use of force does not match the appropriate level of resistance. So we'd like to look into that as well. And that's all, of course, under the umbrella of looking at effective policy mechanisms to lower the use of force. Next slide. We did a little bit of exploratory data analysis, but we didn't want to get too deep into it before we had board approval. You can see here on the screen, this is a representation of MMPD's use of force continuum, deadly force at the top, official presence at the bottom, and all these various force techniques in the middle. Next slide. What you see here is obviously the uses of force have jumped in 2022 by a huge magnitude, but I think more accurately, MMPD is just tracking use of force more. Really what they're doing, next slide, is tracking use of force at a higher degree, soft empty hand use of force at a higher degree, and that was per a COB recommendation that we made. Previous to January 1st, 2022, MMPD was not tracking soft empty hand use of force unless there was an allegation of injury. So 2022 represents a huge jump in the tracked uses of soft empty hand control, and we think that presents a really interesting research opportunity that we'd like to dive into more. As you can see on this graph, it's far and away the highest use of force. Next slide. And we also want to unpack here, when you exclude soft empty hand control, what other factors are going on here. There are mostly declines in use of force, but there are a few types of use of force that are upticking, and we want to really dig into those. Next slide. As I mentioned, we want to look at uses of force by race. You can see on that left graph there, in general, there's disparate use of force by race, such that black folks have force used on them more than do white folks. When you start to include weapons displays, which are not technically a use of force because you've drawn your taser, you've drawn your firearm, that disparity widens, and that presents a really interesting research avenue, we think. Next slide. And that disparity appears again and even stronger when you look at youth. You can see on that left graph, there's a massive disparity. Black youth have a lot more force used against them than anybody else. And that large gap even widens still when you include weapons displays. So these are things we want to look into more. These are more of the descriptive statistics that I was mentioning earlier. We want to do higher level analyses to unpack these. Next slide. Just briefly going through methodology, we want to basically uncover the types of force used by MNPD, how frequently they're used, on whom they're used, where they're used, who's using them. And as an annual report, we'll track that, the implementation of any policies annually and make further recommendations. This should be a pretty easy report to do from a quantitative perspective, since we already have weekly downloads of MMPD's use of force data automated. So we have all this quantitative data. We do want to do a little bit of qualitative work in terms of talking to community members who have had force used against them, as well as kind of their connections, to see the community perspective on use of force. So that's really the only data we would need to collect. The rest of it is just analyzing data that we already have. Next slide. And the questions, I already went over these, so I'm not going to beat them into the ground, but how much force is used? What types of force? Against whom? Is there disparate force? Who is using force? And kind of using that as an officer risk identification tool. Where is the use of force concentrated? The level of relationship between resistance and use of force. That use of force trends in 2022 in specific, since there was that massive jump in tracking of use of force of a soft empty hand control. And finally, what the community perception of use of force policies and practices is. I think this is a pretty realistic timeline of presenting this to you today, presuming that you approve it. Since we have most of the data we already need, we can hit the ground running for the most part and provide you a draft, hopefully, at the June board meeting. Policy advisory reports then are required to have a public comment meeting, which we could do between that and the July meeting. I just threw out the week of July 3rd, and then present you with a revised policy advisory report at our July meeting, which you could then approve. I think that's the last slide. There's some references if you want to do more reading, but any questions, if you have them, I'll take.
Hi. See. Holloway.
Looking at your data, why do you think this happened to young male, black males?
I have a lot of theories that I would like to explore in this research. One theory thrown out there is that there's been research shown that youth of color, and specifically black youth, are often seen as older and more aggressive than white youth of the same age. That could be an explanation of this behavior, but just from this surface level analysis, I don't have an answer for you, and I'd like to dig into that question deeper.
Okay, that's a good answer. I know why, but simply the fact, you got to look at the makeup of the department. We've been arguing for this over 20, 30 years that the department should reflect the makeup of the community, and it's not. And I have done some training myself for youth gang intervention, and what I found out that they need to be taught what to do when stopped by the police. When you're out there on the street, it's a no-win situation, and we need to teach these youth how to respond, record with the eyes, with the ears, and take it to their parents, not try to handle it themselves, And like I said, but most of the training I had done throughout the years that, and even in other states, that we find that these youth more or less let their mouths sometimes get them in trouble, being outspoken, you know, and it's right, because it's America, you know, and you know, you being the police, that doesn't give you the right because you got the badge on your chest. I do what I want to do, and you do what I say do, you know. And we train with professionalism, and that's something to like, and, you know, we got to do better training.
Thank you, Board Member Holloway. As a retired former police officer, your words mean a lot here, at least on my ears. I appreciate that. Other board members? Okay, I saw Board Member Mary H. Beard.
Yes. Thank you. Totally need to understand the process, but what I can tell from the policy advisory proposal, the use of force report would be one in which you would provide the data that you just presented today. Data is great to have, but does this report need to have some analysis behind the data as to the why, and what are we going to do because of what we see in the data? So I do think that we're on the right track based upon the information that you provided, but I don't see where we're going to say to Board Member Holloway's question, to the fact that why are these numbers the way they are, and what are the recommendations we're going to make to the police department as to some things that we can do to eradicate those numbers and bring those numbers down to more manageable statistics.
Yeah, and absolutely that is the intent here. Just for explanation purposes, what the process looks like is before we get into any of that why, we have to present a proposal to the board, which is what we're doing here today. If the board so chooses, then the research staff can dedicate their time to getting into that and digging it and providing that higher level analysis that I was talking about. And any policy advisory report will come with specific articulable recommendations to the police department about policies to modify, change, add, remove, based on the higher level analysis that we intend to do on this data. What we presented today was merely a descriptive summary of what we see high level in the data and some possible avenues for future research, which is exactly what we would intend to do over the next couple of months. Once we come out with a longer, more fleshed out report, we would then present that to the board, then have a public hearing where we would incorporate public perspective and feedback and board perspective and feedback, and then again present the policy advisory report to the board for final approval and adoption. So we'll definitely be incorporating all your concerns over the next couple of months.
Thank you very much.
Board Member Turner.
Is there any way to kind of map that data to see the areas of town where this force is being kind of targeted, one, and then two, any way to look at the data of the socioeconomic? I know we could probably do it as far as the area, but I'll be curious on the socioeconomic treatment in Davidson County by the police department. So I'll stop there.
Yes, absolutely. To your first question, we're really interested in unpacking the geography of where this happens, and we have the tools to do it. I have some really interesting ideas, I think, on how you can track those changes year by year, zip code by zip code, RPA by RPA, which is really small reporting areas, and then kind of using those as proxies for understanding the where and the who. I think that's going to be a really interesting analysis for us to dig into. Second question about socioeconomics. We don't really have individual level data in terms of who the force was used on often. We have basic identifiers like name and race and gender and things like that. So we would probably have to use location more often, as you suggest, if we would look into that. But I think that's an interesting angle to consider as well.
And also be curious to see the treatment of our tourists as well. So I don't know if you can add that, but I'd just be curious to see how the tourists are treated as well.
Yeah, we'll look into it.
You mean other than in Scoop, Nashville?
No, that's.
Board Member Woodson.
You mentioned the quantitative aspect of the research, and you also said there would be some qualitative data. Would that or could that include police officers? Or is this something that's been thought about at this point?
Not thought about at this point, but I think it's a good idea. I think that we should get perspective from both sides anytime we can. So we'll think about that and see how we can incorporate that.
Thank you.
I want to commend you and your team on a very well written and structured recommended or proposed research document. I know the process. I know where you're going, and I'm looking forward to that. I want to also know if you guys can flush out a little bit more about this relative force issue in your next iteration, as opposed to just pure volume. Take a look at, any kind of stats associated with that. The adultification of young men and women of color. I thought that the golf reference on the loss of innocence, or whatever the name of it was great. I'm going to go back and read it. But, will these types of theories meet with data at some point that might give us some insight as to how it affects Nashville?
Yes, absolutely. That's the exciting part of this. I think I presented all those ideas that you heard on the slides and in there because I think that we do have the data to dig into that. For instance, we've already calculated what we call relative risk scores. So that is taking the officer use of force relative to resistance levels and identifying where there are positives such that there's more force used than would be appropriate if you were kind of following it on a continuum level. We haven't really dug into the why of that as of yet, but we've laid the foundation for that.
Will you also be able to kind of bring in more light to this issue of how differently one who has experienced use of force approaches or reacts to it the next time? I thought that was something that was in the data as well that you noted. Maybe it's not to be flushed out here, but I trust that those kinds of methods or theories also will meet with some data at some point. I want to just ask a couple other things, and that is, where is the divergence, or what is the potential of divergence in the data that comes from MNPD, okay, and what we're seeing or what we might see in a final report, given the history of that dashboard producing data in other reports that was provided by MNPD that we presented based upon what was provided, and then MNPD comes back and says that data's not right, your results aren't right. Is there a potential for that type of discrepancy here with this particular data?
There's certainly the potential because we have a lot more lines of data than are presented on the dashboard. I'm not prepared to tell you why exactly that is. I think that's going to be part of the conversation that we're going to have with MNPD. But I think that's all I want to say about that at this point. That will be something that we'll look into. I don't have a firm answer, so I don't want to speak to something like that.
So it probably was an unfair question, but I had to ask it. Board Member McCree.
Okay. First, Gavin, thank you so much for this report. The wheels in my mind are turning, okay? So I'm just gonna, since we can't speak to each other outside of this space, I'm just gonna talk out loud what's going on here. Is there a way, given the possible legislation or push for school resource officers that will be coming in the next coming months, to tie in some type of research around what the use of force standard is and has been used with school resource officers in relationship to our kids?
I think it's a super important topic, and I'd have to consult the data to identify whether I could do that with what I have right now. But at bare minimum, I think that there's an avenue to discuss that based on what we were seeing with use of force against youth of color. I think that is a really important topic to consider. If we have data that says use of force that's being used in schools, I think that we can look into that. We haven't gotten into the geography for me to be able to answer that question, but we have locations. So if those locations are schools, then that's definitely an avenue we can explore.
Okay, thank you. No real follow-up. I just really would be interested. I know when I came onto the board, that was an area that I specifically was very interested in looking at. And now that we are post-Covenant, the incident and the response to the Covenant shooting, it's let's put more SROs in our middle and high schools. I really would like to, with any power that we have left, really take a look on what that relationship will look like within MMPD and our metro schools.
I'm going to go to Director Fitchett, and then I'll come back over here to Board Member Goddard.
Yeah, so I think since we've talked about Tyree Nichols, and I think that having, and I talked to you a little bit about this, but having a use of force report that includes the cost of departments. I don't know how you could add that in, but we know that usually with uses of force or excessive uses of force, there is at some point cities have to pay out. I'm sure Ms. Beard has seen that too, what that cost looks like. I don't know how you would incorporate it, whether you would just use our city as a sample or whatever, but I do think it's important because we know that cities are having to pay an increasingly amount of settlements in regards to police misconduct specifically associated with excessive uses of force.
And in deference to the time, I'm going to impose on myself, as well as others, some kind of adherence, if we will, to trying to wrap up out of here if we can. It's close to 6 o'clock. I saw Board Member Goddard.
Very quickly, I would suggest, going back to your thing about the police and different data, you may already be planning on this, just a suggestion. To the extent you're getting data from the police department, dashboards, whatever else, let them know early, whoever they is, what you're intending to use it for, and let them have an opportunity to comment if they think any of that is incomplete, incorrect, whatever, early, rather than hearing about it right after we release the report. Since you're using other data, I defer to you on whether it makes sense to do the same thing with that data, but best you can head off any, we didn't know that, you've misused the data, along those lines, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's certainly the intent. And this use of force data is directly uploaded to us to a shared drive that we have, versus with the response times report, we were using publicly available data on the dashboard. So there is that discrepancy that I was discussing. So I think that's going to be a very early conversation about why that might be, just to make sure we're not misrepresenting anything.
Board Member Whitfield. Did I see you? I'm sorry, Board Member Turner.
I'd like to make a recommendation to the board if we can. I know we're kind of up against time. That as soon as I saw on there, you can get it done by July, if I'm not mistaken, that if we need to, as a board, convene quicker and to discuss the report, we get the report to us, and then we can kind of make some recommendations to to the city and to the police department. Again, I'm optimistic, but I understand the reality of our legislation of what's going on. So, I don't know if I need to make a recommendation, but that what I would like to recommend that as soon as that report is completed, if it's done by July, get it out, and that we convene, even if it's outside of this time, that we can kind of come together and meet as quickly as we can to discuss and make recommendations.
And what you're doing is calling the question to a degree, because the recommendation here on this is that we make a recommendation as to how we shall proceed. I believe the recommendation from staff is that we do it on a regular track. Is that the recommendation? All right, as opposed to an expedite. And so I want to come back. What do those two different processes look like, particularly in terms of schedule?
It doesn't change the end date. What it does change is and we've had some concerns with this in the past. We've often kind of lumped together public comment and the second board meeting into the same day when we do expedited. And I'm not really interested in doing that because I think this is a topic that needs public feedback. And so to your point, Board Member Turner, the first iteration of this would be presented to you in June. The board then has the opportunity to provide feedback on that report in advance of a public meeting several weeks thereafter, which will again then implement or incorporate the public feedback. So there's two channels for feedback prior to you having to vote on the implementation of the report.
I'm just saying, just want to state that, we kind of, it's urgent. I just want to make sure that we go ahead and do what we need to do, whether we meet more than we usually do, to make sure we get our recommendations, and then to also take the feedback from the public and meet again and try to push out, if we add any more recommendations after the public hearing and the public comment, that we convene again, expedite, and then come back again with some proposals and recommendations to the body and definitely to the police department.
We'll hear from Board Member Haddock, and we'll call the question.
Board Member McCree, that was an excellent question. I wanted to make sure that we lifted up that there's more use of force being used on Black youth. But you know what struck me, Gavin, which this is an excellent report, as usual, is that there were 10 shootings by MNPD officers in 2021, which you say reflect the most on record. And then it just so happens that Officer Andrew Delkey was sentenced to 3 years in prison in 2021. Do you see any kind of correlation, or what is your analysis with that? Do you think that will come up in your report? I just noticed that those two things, related to each other.
I mean, any particular police shooting is sort of has its own context, and so I'm not sure I can speak to that particular case. But I think the broader question also touches what Director Fitcher was saying, in that shootings and excessive force in general are a costly endeavor, whether that be settlement or arrest or anything else for the city. And so I think the report will try to touch on that through that angle. We'll explore other options as to whether other cities are seeing spikes in arrests or associated court costs. But yeah, that's the extent to which I'm comfortable talking about it now. But I share your line of thinking at this point.
Okay, so it was more of an officer was sentenced, and then we have a record number of shootings the same year. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you. Fear of going against my own directive here. Can you just tell us a little bit about that spike in 2021 on use of force as a result of MNPD for the first time capturing soft, the empty hand, use of force, which is commendable, Just explain what soft, empty hand means, please.
Sure. Soft, empty hand control is the lowest item on the force continuum besides officer presence, basically officers simply being there. It involves a variety of techniques. I'm probably going to miss some, but I know it includes techniques like joint manipulation, pressure points, controlled takedowns, things like that. The next step up in the continuum is, so the difference is with soft, empty hand control, generally, colloquially, hands are open. You go up to hard, empty hand control when you close your fist or you use other objects like that. Yeah. So that's kind of the distinction there.
Thank you. Other questions on the report? All right. Do I have a motion to accept the recommendation? Okay. It's been moved. Is there a second?
Seconded.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded that this board adopt the recommendation and for this research proposal on a regular track. Is that correct? All right. Any further questions? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed say no. We have also a kind of an update of a previously presented report on MNPD response times and clearance rates, the rates of response from MNPD officers and clearance rates by those who are charged with investigating crime. Can you give us a brief update, please?
Sure, and I'll try to really hit the high notes here, particularly since we're a couple of months out from all this happening. But this is an update to a report that was presented to the board in February. It was an informational report that outlines that MNPD was seeing increasing response times across all call types, emergency, urgent, routine. They were all spiking. Next slide. We gathered all this data from MNPD's publicly available data dashboard. And actually that data dashboard was responsive specifically to a COB recommendation that was made in October of 2020. We recommended that MNPD publish an interactive dashboard of quarterly or monthly use of force statistics, and they did that and more, including this response times database, stops. There's a bunch of really interesting dashboards that I encourage folks to check out. And it's important to note that these dashboards exist as a transparency tool and that they were directly responsive to a COB recommendation. So for this report, we downloaded the data at the end of January 2023, presented the report to the COB just over 3 weeks later. After that meeting, WPLN and other such news entities released articles covering the report. And following that, MNPD removed over 22,000 calls from that response times dashboard, dating back to at least 2018. In the follow-up reporting that WPLN did, MNPD's public position was that they removed all of those data points that were more than 3 standard deviations from mean response times. It's basically removing any outlier calls. And they did this because they believed those 22,000 calls were erroneous data points that occurred because some officers may not have been logging proper codes in their dispatch system or not logging those codes at all, which led to those erroneous response times. And we have the data set that we downloaded in January, as well as one that we downloaded after that change was made. I'm not going to go through all these columns here, but suffice it to say that in the updated data columns, MNPD's response times improved rather dramatically across all call types. There was maybe one exception in there of the 20 or so call types that we looked at. But you see that in average response time for routine calls, all calls, urgent calls, emergency calls, shootings, robberies, it runs the gauntlet. And next slide. The first important thing is that we stand by our report and the data analysis that we presented to you in February. We used publicly available data, and we noted the source of that publicly available data. It was from an MNPD dashboard. And we have some concerns about the statistical approach that was used there. In general, a sound statistical approach demands that outliers are not just deleted, they are investigated, and the root cause determined why these outliers existed. And then that allows you to determine whether those outliers should be deleted, whether they should be amended, corrected. And in this case, it seems, from the information we have, as though they were just deleted. That creates 2 concerns in our perspective. One, that widespread deletion has removed valuable data points. We know that MNPD is continuing to use those calls, or those incidents rather, in other sorts of reports. They're just not using them for the response times, and so we have some questions about why that might be. And also, if we take MNPD at their word and their explanation of officer and or dispatcher error is accurate, this highlights a different concern that officers have maybe not been cataloging their response times correctly for 5 years or more, and that information was being presented publicly on a dashboard that was intended to be a transparency tool. We think, to that point, that data dashboards have a really excellent potential for transparency, and it is truly commendable that there are so many dashboards that MNPD makes available. But if the data on those tools is not accurate, and it was not accurate in this particular instance, we think that that kind of begs the question of do we need to look into the rest of these dashboards? Do we need to do more research on transparency tools in general? Not the least of which that we think it also highlights future research regarding response time disparity. I put more on this slide than I'm going to go into, but there are lawsuits, there's research that kind of identifies that certain neighborhoods, particularly neighborhoods of color and neighborhoods that have low socioeconomic status, often see slower response times, and we're not sure where these 22,000 calls were removed from. And so that causes another layer of concern. The city of Chicago just settled a lawsuit about exactly that, about response times being slower in certain neighborhoods. So we're concerned about those 20,000 calls and kind of want to dig deeper into it. And I think I'll leave it there and leave space for questions.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot. And I'm not sure if we're going to have really the opportunity to really dig into that, but I'll do two things. I'll make sure that board members who have a question get an opportunity to ask as it relates specifically to this report. I see Board Member Holloway.
What I know from experience, what has an effect on a lot of time on the response time, due to the shift was a evening shift where a lot of people are out working or not working at all, as compared to a midnight shift where a lot of people at home are sleeping, not businesses are closed. And it also has to do with the heavily populated area, you know, where one they have been having a lot of problem with that they've been televising is the 37208 area. And also the response also has to do with what time of year it is. Take the 4th of July. You got the manpower is basically, you got large manpower dealing with the celebration downtown on the 4th of July, a fanfare, that type of thing, you know. So people on special assignment or people sent to work to make sure they can handle the mass crowd of people that fluctuate, that pays the taxes, the money, the millions of dollars they make during the celebration has a lot to do with it. And then you got to do the time of the year, whether it's cold. You know, when it's real cold, you know, a lot of people trying to stay in and try to stay warm. But when it's hot, they're out flying around, visiting each other.
A lot of environmentals there. I look forward to having a more in-depth discussion about your findings. Again, we appreciate the depth, okay, and the clarity that this report brings to us, and once again emphasizes the overwhelming need for a community oversight board that presents things to the public, findings that otherwise would not be made available necessarily in a digestible form. So we appreciate that. And we see Commander Laura in the back, and we want to thank you also for working with us and making sure that we end up lining up in the same place ultimately. We always appreciate what you do and your effort. Anything further, CW?
No, the research team is we're actively considering our options with what we want to do here. And we just wanted to give the board an update before too much time and distance had passed. So we'll come to you probably next month or perhaps June with further information.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank your team as well. Appreciate you guys. Is there any further business before I get to the closing public comment? I understand that there's another member of the public who wishes to come before this body. Now is the time, if there is a member of the public who wishes to come before this body to make public. Yes.
We received a public comment by email during the meeting, which Director Fitchard asked me to read into the record, but I don't know if anyone is
Understood.
present.
I see at least one person present, and we'll ask that person to come forward. Please state your name, and you'll have some time to present. And then we'll go to the email. Yes, is your microphone on?
Hi, I'm Stephanie. I can ask any questions? Okay, perfect.
You can ask any question you like.
Okay, I have a lot of follow-up questions, but I'll just get to like 3. Okay, for the research team that was just here, what's the demographics of that research team?
Assistant Director Kylie.
Oh, y'all are the research team? Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry.
In the absence of I'm going to turn to the assistant director.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Could I just specifically, you mean like race, age?
2 white males, white female.
Mm-hmm.
sitting right
Okay,
behind
yeah,
you.
who's pulling the data? Okay, thank you. Let's see. And then, so if people come with information outside of the realm of the COB, is there any follow-up? Because I know when, I guess she was speaking, the woman in the beginning, you said if there's anything that you guys can handle, you'll reach out. But if there isn't, will you still reach out and give her recommendations of where to go?
That would be up to staff, but I'm going to say from a general standpoint, we do have a charter that describes what our authorities are, and we're bound to stay within that. But as far as the details of looking into it and seeing if in fact there's anything that can be done within that charter, that's going to be left up to staff.
Yeah, so our investigative authority is only as to MMPD. When we get complaints about other departments, Sheriff's Department, Highway Patrol, whatever, what we try to do is forward those on to the appropriate agency because they're not within our jurisdiction, but we certainly want to facilitate getting those to the right people.
Okay. And so you don't follow with the person, you kind of just send it off and hope they respond to them.
I think the recently ones since I've been here, I've responded to those people and said, you know, I'm thank you, and I'm directing your thing to this individual or that individual, so they know where it's going. I do want people to know, you know, we're sending it here, and you can follow up with them.
Okay,
So
that's great. And is there any research about that follow up from other departments? I know you guys are holding the MPD accountable,
Yeah.
so the other departments, how are they being held?
I think that is a great question. I don't think we track that. I know that the Department of Emergency Communications is pretty communicative with us, and in the past they have updated us to say, you know, we spoke to this person or that person, but those are the only ones I can speak to personally.
Okay, great. And then final thing, can I email other questions? Are y'all not allowed to talk outside here or?
Absolutely,
Okay.
you can email. In fact, all of our email addresses are online, and please feel free to do so.
All right, thank you. Okay, last question. So
Take your time.
when you guys were talking about following up with the state on what's happening, it seemed like there was kind of a discrepancy on what should be happening right now. Like, should people be contacting the state? It seems like some people are saying, well, it's being handled. So I'm just trying to get clarity. Is everybody on the same page as what happens next?
Yeah, this process has been a long and tumultuous one, right?
Yeah.
And we know that as of Friday, okay, that the state legislature passed a bill and sent it to the governor.
Okay.
The governor, as of the last hearing, has not signed it.
Okay.
All right. And so right now there's an interval for action.
Okay.
And that's what we really want to concentrate on right now.
Okay.
He could have signed it during the course of this meeting, or he could sign it next week. Okay. But what we want folks to do is to call the governor's office, to email the governor, email his staff, and encourage him, to implore him to veto that bill.
Okay.
Now, as of what happens after that, of course, until you have a true cause of action, which is when it's actually passed, you know, everything is kind of like up in the air. And this team is dedicated to continuing to get together and to strategize in the appropriate places on what to do next.
Okay. Because I have seen comment that, you know, there's a lot of public engagement around the gun legislation, but there hasn't been as much for you all. But I haven't necessarily seen how you want the public to engage. And so, yes, that's just like, so if.
And that's where we are now. And I want to also, you know, thank the public that has come out, which has come out during this entire process. There's been protests, there's been gatherings and rallies and press conferences and witness testimony before each subcommittee and the full House. You individually may not see that, but there has been a tremendous effort, and we have and will continue to fight for the voted right of the people of Nashville and Davidson County. So keep your ear to the ground, because depending on where this goes, there'll be, again, strategy that could result in another call for action.
Okay, wonderful.
Are you a reporter?
I am not a reporter. I did go to journalism school.
You did?
But I did not.
No, please go on.
Last thing, so Yes, there's been comment, as I've talked to people, that the board hasn't been as effective. But what I've been seeing lately, and someone recently reached out to my aunt who had a situation, and now she's reaching out, and she didn't know that she even had that power. And so I'm seeing how powerful this is, but the public engagement for it, I feel like it's kind of like the Obama health plan in the Republican Congress, where they were saying it doesn't work, but they were essentially sabotaging it. So I'm just wondering, like, the support for you guys. I've been hearing that you haven't had that support. And so how can, I guess, the council support you? Are they supporting you? And how can we maintain that support and continue to ensure that the public is engaged and know this resource is here? Because I feel like I haven't even been as knowledgeable, and I want to stay knowledgeable. I just want to know, like, what's in support do you need as far as that, if that makes sense?
Well, I appreciate and understand your comments. And, we have purposely moved our meetings into neighborhoods.
Okay.
On many months. And our outreach has been significantly enhanced as a result of our recently getting the ability to hire a community liaison.
Okay.
To get a social worker who helps us with wraparound services and helps to keep the community informed. I think you'll see, if you look at our social media, particularly within the last year, you'll be able to see the engagement that we've asked for in the community. And I appreciate your being upfront about what you see as opposed to versus what you've heard.
Yes.
Okay, and it always takes an effort on the part of not only this board, but also on the part of the citizenry, right, to come and to engage and to know. I'm going to say this, for God's sake, a grandmother was dragged out of the galley of the state legislature over this issue. Okay, there are people who are engaged, and we are doing as much as we can to invite folks to be engaged. This staff that we have that are in charge of those things that I mentioned are top notch, and they're doing it. They're doing it. It'd be a disservice for me not to say that right now. So I appreciate where you're coming from and what you're saying.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I don't want, people saying, oh, it doesn't work. Well, are you helping them make it work? So that's how I see everything. So I appreciate it. And then I'll just email follow-up questions.
Thank you so much for your questions. Thank you. All right. Okay. Anything further? Okay. All right. And the public comment on the read-in of the email.
Public comment related to a point that Mr. Milner just made. We received this email from Michelle Flynn, who was arrested at the Capitol during the protest last week. And so I'll just read that verbatim. Ms. Flynn writes, Community Oversight Board and members of the Nashville community, given the over-policing of my body as a white elder woman by an overzealous trooper who decided, rather than following the instructions of the Speaker of the House, for me to leave the chamber, and instead decided I must leave the Capitol, I am more convinced than ever that political and police leaders do not want control of the COBs in the hands of local residents or independent investigations of possible police misconduct, because this frightens and threatens them, leaving everyone in our community, especially black and brown-bodied people, less safe and understandably more distrustful of officers, including those who do their jobs. Signed, Michelle Flynn.
For that.
Did you send that email to the rest of us?
Oh, that'd be awesome. That'd be great. Anything further? Hearing none, do I hear a motion to adjourn? I'm sorry, Pastor Turner?
I just wanted to say a real quick comment. I don't think that it was a coincidence that all of these legislations against the city of Nashville came all at one time, and several issues got kind of the highlight, took national attention, and kind of overshadowed some other issues, including the COB. So I want to say that I think everyone is doing the best we could, but I think the media kind of took precedence over some, and some other issues took kind of precedence over this issue, but I think it was not coincidence that I think it's very intentional and strategic that this body did what they did, how they did it, and planned it out that way to try to make this happen. So,
Thank you. Legal Resource Advisor, you.
I don't know how many more times we're going to be able to have a chance to talk, but when I think about the effectiveness, I also think about the design of the Community Oversight Board, the way it's funded. Structurally, we have 13 staff with less than half a percentage point of what the police department, which we're tasked to oversee, receives, with a body of 1,700, I think, trained officers, as well as other agencies that support that department. So when you think about how effective can less than half a percentage point be of what they're being seen? Not to say that I don't love this job, I don't love this work, and there's things that we can and we do, but we could be doing more, we want to do more, we just need adequate funding to do so. I reminded when I used to work at the Public Defender's Office for close to 10 years, the most effective defense attorney in the world cannot do that job well or to the same degree as somebody in private practice with the caseloads and the funding that they get. So similarly, if you want to see effective oversight of police, you have to fund and give it structurally what it needs to be effective in that position, no matter how good and dedicated the staff and board is.
Anything further? Is there a motion to adjourn? Yes. We're adjourned.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.